Welcome and good evening. I'm Mary Bilo. I'm the head of information services here at the Hedberg Public Library. And thank you all for coming out tonight, and we hope you enjoy the program. The library is partnering with the Historic Commission and the Janesville League of Women Voters for tonight's program, Meet Your Janesville Historic Commission. Our speakers tonight will be Nancy Stabb, representing the Janesville League of Women Voters, Gale Price, Manager of Building and Development Services for the City of Janesville, and Historic Commission member James Dumke. Nate is here from our local public access television station, JATV, and they are recording this evening's program, which will air later this month, possibly in about 10 days, on channel 98 or 994 if you have HD. Thank you, Nate, for being here. So we're going to start off tonight with Nancy. Nancy is a former member of the Janesville City Council and has a longtime interest in politics and government. She's been involved with the League of Women Voters for almost 50 years and was league president on 2 separate occasions and is currently leading the league's study of local housing issues. I'll turn the microphone over to Nancy so she can tell us about the league's interest in this subject.
Many people know the League of Women Voters for our voter service activities, including voter registration and candidate forums. But a lot of people do not know that the members of the League also study public policy issues, issues that the members are interested in. And if there's member agreement, we take a position on the issue. In the 1970s, our members had an interest in historic preservation and wanted to study that and see how it might be applied in Janesville. And we took a position based on our study. And our position was that the preservation of historic buildings and neighborhoods is important, and that the city government has an important role to play in preservation. When planning for streets and schools, community facilities, zoning changes, and variances, all of these should be evaluated in terms of their effect on the neighborhood and historic resources. The League also advocated at that time for adoption of a historic district ordinance, including creation of a historic preservation commission. That would allow interested property owners to take advantage of the various tax incentives for preservation. Our position also included strong support for property owners being involved in the definition of historic district boundaries. An ordinance creating such a commission was adopted in 1981. And since that time, we have continued to support the efforts of the Commission and the City to raise awareness of the value of preservation of historically significant structures and districts as good economics, as well as enhancing and stabilizing neighborhoods. We review our positions periodically. Good thing this one was adopted over 30 years ago. And this year we're reviewing our position on historic preservation. So we're very pleased to be partnering with the library and with the commission tonight to bring this information to the residents of Janesville. Thank you.
Gale Price is the manager of Building and Development Services for the City of Janesville. He currently is the lead staff person for the Janesville Historic Commission and sits as the ex officio member of the Rock County Historical Society. Gale has been with the city for 12 years and originally started his employment with the City of Janesville as a senior planner and site plan review coordinator. Before joining the team here at the City of Janesville, he had held three different planner positions with the City of Champaign, Illinois. Gale holds a Bachelor of Urban Planning from the University of Cincinnati College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. And while in college, he worked with historic preservation commissions in Covington, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio. I'll say a little bit about James Dumke now, and then when time comes, Gale can just hand it over. James has always also been interested in historic buildings since college, so this is a long-time interest for a lot of people. One of his classes at Lewis University taught history by studying architectural trends and exploring what those trends suggest about the prevailing ideas and philosophies of specific historical periods. In addition to his work on the Historic Commission, James also volunteers at the Rock County Historical Society and is a Civil War reenactor with Company K, 2nd Wisconsin Volunteers, and with the 17th Corps Field Hospital units.
I do appreciate being here. It's always enjoyable to get the word out about historic preservation. Those things that we do as members of the city and as a governmental agency that really doesn't get a lot of positive discussion. It seems like when this does get discussed, it's somewhat negative because there's a perception there that historic preservation is about control and not allowing a private property owner to make decisions on their own property. So getting the word out about preservation and the positive aspects of it's always fun for me, so I appreciate that. And hopefully I won't be knocking stuff off this podium all night long. So I want to talk a little bit about the Historic Commission background, the creation of the commission, how that was done, what were the tools that brought that about, the roles of the commission, because even though we think about Historic Preservation Commission, there's actually a number of things that the commission does with regards to historic preservation, and actually it ends up being a resource for other entities as things come up, and I'll touch on that a little bit. We have responsibilities as a certified municipality. Basically, there are a number of certified municipalities in Wisconsin, and there are certain responsibilities about getting the word out about historic preservation. This will actually be one of the things on the list, the next year's report, when we turn that into the state next August. And then talking a little bit about work programs and what all that involves. And that really, again, ties into that message about preservation and what our responsibilities are as a certified municipality. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the commission experiences. And James is really going to talk a lot about that work with the private property owners and a review of their requests for changes to their structures. And really that's focused on the Courthouse Hill Historic District, where there's not as much involvement in the other historic districts, although we'll talk a little bit about an attempt to do the same thing in the downtown in 2010. And then providing guidance, basically, for maintenance of these homes, because as many of us in this room understand, older homes need a little different TLC than maybe a newer home. So how do you go about doing that, and how do you go about doing that and maintaining that historical character of the structure? Well, as with any law, you can't do it without an ordinance. So basically, Historic Commission and the basics of historic preservation were established through the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance was rewritten in the early 80s, and as Nancy had noted, in 1981 was its adoption. But as I understand, the actual first commission wasn't until 82. Now, the City of Janesville Ordinance, and I'm not going to read that number, I'm not going to bore you with the details of all of what the ordinance says, but to really give you a sense of it, it's identify those improvements or sites and neighborhoods which embody the city's history. And that's pretty encompassing, and I certainly have paraphrased that from what our ordinance says, but when you think about that in the context of the dynamics of a city environment, that's a lot of different things. That's buildings, that's the history of what may have gone on in those buildings. History could be where Lincoln made his speech downtown, that we have a marker downtown. These are all elements that embody that history. And it's important because we learn from history. We like to reflect on the past. We like to reflect on the positives of the past, sometimes the negatives of the past. And I assume most of us here are somewhat interested in history of one kind or another. We've probably all visited battlefields or other historic sites, and they all have their unique attributes. But that shapes us as a community, as a state, and as a country. So it's important that we preserve those elements as much as possible. To get in a little more of the details of the intent of the ordinance is safeguarding, preserving, and enhancing those improvements. So again, thinking about our history and the importance of that and promoting that preservation is certainly a goal of the ordinance. And then stabilizing and improving property values to protect the city's attractiveness and livability. And again, that's something that Nancy had touched on when they were promoting historic preservation as an ideal in the community. There's many people that, again, believe that historic preservation really doesn't advance the economics of the community. But there's been many studies that would say otherwise, that historic preservation is important for the financial stability and viability of a community. As an example, one of the things I like to pull out on people is a study by Dumke, The Economic Power of Restoration. And you know, when this subject comes up with citizens, I love to make a copy of this and encourage them to read this, because it really lays it out that it's an important part of preserving our communities. And you know, communities evolve, but it's important, again, to preserve what we have in place. When I think about this in the grand puzzle of being a city planner, it's part of the puzzle, and it's important to preserve as much as we can. Now, there's an economic aspect to that. When we talk about preservation of buildings in our economy that's about profit and making money, you have to really have an adaptive reuse for these buildings, especially when they need to be repurposed. And fortunately, there are people out there that are coming up with great ideas to repurpose buildings. I just saw an article yesterday from the Urban Land Institute, which is basically a developer organization, which awarded one of the world, an award for one of the best redevelopments in the world. That they rated the top 35, and one of them was the redevelopment of a building in downtown Cincinnati, where I went to college. And again, it's a case of where the developer believes there's an adaptive reuse, believes that preservation is important, and is able to bring the elements together for both preserving some history and creating some profit. A little bit about the Historic Commission. There's 7 members of the commission, and they're basically nominated through, you can make an application to the city, and then there is a review that's done by a commission that does just basically reviews on appointments to various committees. Each member serves a 2-year term, or it's a 3-year term. I had these numbers mixed up before we got here. 3-year terms, but you can serve 2 total. And the terms are offset, so we don't have all the commission leaving at one time and getting all new commission members. So we've got commission members that can show the new commission members kind of the way to go as they get up to speed. One of the things I like to remind people about the Historic Commission is I believe it's the hardest working commission in the community, because this commission, unlike any other commission, does not get staff reports, does not get an incredible amount of information passed on to them. They get stuff like the big binder that's got all the kind of the resources that they need to understand, or at least have a general understanding of. But when it comes down to it, they're doing all the work that with each one of the citizens. Unlike when I or Mr. Schwagel negotiates a development agreement with a developer, we go to the Plan Commission, there's a detailed staff report, we've done all this background work, we've worked through all the issues with the developer. It's the commission members that do all the work with the citizens that make these applications. So I really like to remind people when they're interested in the Historic Commission, you'll be doing some work, but it's really good work and it's beautiful work for the city. I paraphrase this whole, what is the scope here, and it's all things historic, and in a lot of ways it really is. The commission is responsible for establishing historic districts. So basically, they do the background work, put together the plan to actually create the district. There's an ordinance that does that, but they're doing all the background work. Nomination of historic structures, they can work through the process to do that. Review exterior projects in the overlay district, and again, that's limited to the Courthouse Hill at this time. Provide recommendations to the City Council, and then provide guidance to those persons who request it. So if you have a historic home, you're interested in doing some kind of exterior alteration, and you really want some guidance on it, the Historic Commission is happy to do that, is really talk through it. I think most people don't bother if they're not in the Courthouse Hill, more so because they don't know it's a resource out there and available. So, we've got 12 historic districts in the community. In the one overlay district, they are really defining with those districts significant structures and significant groups of structures. The one key importance, I think, from an economic standpoint is the tax credit program. Tax credits allow people to it's basically a financial assistance for people who live in historic districts and seek to do improvements to their properties. We don't see a lot of this in Janesville, but it's an important element that's available to citizens that are in historic districts or have properties that are designated as historic. One of the other aspects of being designated as a historic structure is building code relief. Now, that's not something that in the longer term has been something highly promoted. One of the aspects of my daily job duties is that I'm the building official, and I am basically the code guy. And it makes it interesting as our codes have evolved in the last 10 years. Wisconsin used to have its own building code. We still have our own unique residential building code, but we have adopted the International Commercial Building Code. And basically that's a conglomeration of code councils that decided to try to bring a national code together. The importance of that is that group has seen a need to alter code to address existing buildings. So they created the existing building code that was adopted by Wisconsin 4 years ago. The beauty of that is I get a lot of leeway when I deal with buildings and citizens over issues about making changes to their structure. And it's exciting for me because I believe in preservation, but I also believe in building codes. And I can do things like wave railings that wouldn't have been historically appropriate on the Tallman House, which I did. And when the south porch was done, there was a debate about whether or not we needed a railing around the south porch. We found pictures that showed there was no railing there. That's good enough under the building code for us to say that's the way it's going to be. And that's great, because there are instances where it's just nearly impossible. The term we use in the building code industry is technically infeasible to make something work under a current code. And it's fun for me because we get to see both sides of it and work through the issue. Now, I mentioned, or the last item was the historic overlay. And that also requires historic review for any exterior changes to that. We've got a map. I was hoping this would show up a little better. My apologies. If you're interested in whether or not you're in a historic district or where those are at, I'd be happy to give you my card and you can get a more detailed map here. So, but obviously we've got a lot of districts all centered around the core of downtown and our more historic neighborhoods. Obviously, the Courthouse Hill here in the violet. We've got Prospect Hill. Look west on the near west side of town, Milwaukee Street, the old Fourth Ward, Benton Avenue, Columbus Circle, and I'm missing a couple others that I can't quite read. I know that's Jefferson Avenue. So when you go down those streets, you really get a sense of, why they were designated as historic districts. And I'd encourage you to take some time on a nicer day than today to go out and experience those if you're not already living in one of them or enjoying the walkability of them. I belabored the comment on the hardest working commission earlier, but I just want to touch a little bit on it. In addition to those responsibilities that I was talking about earlier, the commission's given the responsibility, especially through the Certified Local Government Program, to get the message out about historic preservation and to help educate people about preservation. And I think that's one of the things that, at least as a staff member, when I step back and I think about it, it's like, what do we do? Do we do enough to get the message out? So when the invite came for the commission to speak tonight, I was really excited because this is an excellent opportunity to educate people, and we're going to hope that you all help spread the word after this meeting. Touch a little bit on some of the past work programs. If you attend the Tallman Arts Festival, there's almost always a commission table there with literature, pamphlets, handouts about or booklets that you can purchase for background on the various historic districts, opportunity to ask questions to the commission members. Again, one of those opportunities to provide some education about historic preservation. In the past, the commission has provided historic district tours. So basically put together tours of various houses, historic districts, etc. One of the other discussion or work programs was trying to promote preservation in the old gas station that you've heard discussions about next to the city police station and across the street from the municipal building. And then last, in the past, we've had historic preservation expos held at Old Town Mall, usually during Preservation Week or Preservation Month, which is in May. And those have been pretty exciting and pretty good. Currently, the commission, again, attends the Tallman Art Festival. We'll talk about the historic district plan for the downtown. And one of the things that the commission is working on right now is district signage. So the idea is that, again, to help get the message out, to help people understand their sense of place, is an idea to develop signage, unique signage for the historic districts that would be identifying all 12 of the historic districts in the community. They're working on the design with TAPCO Corporation. TAPCO does municipal road signs. They do a lot of work for us. They've come up with a design. We're going to hopefully roll that out onto a real piece of steel here shortly, and then there'll be some other additional discussion and hopefully some fundraising to help put that in place. So, and I really like the idea, and again, this is one of those ideas that comes from commission members. They go to other communities and see that, like Washington, D.C. has these designated historic district signs, and it really sends the message. It's like, hey, you're in a place that you should be aware of. And from getting the message out, that's really important because, we just, again, I don't think we talk about it enough, and it's exciting to me. So, and certainly the commission members are really running with it. I want to talk about one of the past proposals that, if you've been in the community very long and read the newspaper, there was a lot of discussion about the overlay district for the downtown. There was a push and really a desire by the Downtown Development Alliance to consider a historic overlay district for the downtown. Again, tied into the need to preserve the sense of place of downtown and really from on the economic side, understanding that there's positive economics in historic preservation. It would have been our second overlay district, but unlike the Courthouse Hill adoption, it was met with a little bit more resistance. You know, when I talk to people about how the Courthouse Hill district started, and again, this was before I arrived, it was basically bought in by the neighborhood right up front. They wanted it. They were almost demanding it, as I understand it. Where with the downtown, there was a lot more skepticism and resistance to that. And how much of that is the sense of citizens who want to preserve their neighborhood because they live there every day versus citizens, property owners who the downtown buildings may be more about income generation for them. And what is the unknown? What is the unknown when they work with a commission that has to determine whether or not they can replace their windows or they need to rehabilitate their existing windows, things like that. And that's one of the things that was mentioned earlier. I had worked in Covington, Kentucky in college. Covington was a little more unique community as they took a very conservative approach where we had buildings that were built in the 1790s, and when those buildings got their windows replaced, they were wood. So there was a real sense of you're going to do this with the original building materials. So it's again, a sense of perspective. The Historic Overlay District Plan, I did bring one copy here. It's about 12 pages. I do think we have this on the city website. Really lays out the importance of preservation and protection of the historic elements in downtown. It defines the architectural style, so you really get an understanding of the mix of architectural styles we have within the downtown. And it really identifies those building elements that are important and really what should be preserved. And then it lays out the guidelines for review and recommends the boundary of what that proposed district would have been. Essentially, the plan is a policy document. And when we talk about plans versus implementation, the plan is a policy document. It's that guideline. You don't have to hit it to the letter of the law because this isn't the law. The plan isn't the law. The law is the actual ordinance that goes into place. And the unique thing about historic district ordinance is the fact that when a commission goes out and looks at a project or reviews a project, it's based on guidelines that are set out by the Department of Interior. So what's laid out by the Department of the Interior isn't law either. It's guidelines. So it's the guidance for how do we work through these issues and help the client to get to where they want to be. And I touched on that ordinance aspect. So the ordinance would have established the specifics of the district, the legal boundary, the manner to require the review, so the detail of how they go about a review on a project. It essentially is a rezoning under Wisconsin law. And again, as I mentioned, it's the ordinance, and that would be the law that would be in place. The concept or the plan was really 3 years in the making. It was an incredible amount of work for the commission to look at buildings, understand what's in the downtown area. We've got a number of districts downtown, but bringing the whole of downtown into one cohesive district would have been helpful. I mentioned earlier the DDA and the Design Center staff is what really kind of prompted the commission to take that on as a work program and they're using their free time and their commission time to make that happen. So that gives you a sense of why it took 3 years to develop the plan. And, with any good planning document, there needs to be public input. There needs to be time put into that. It's very rare that a plan can get put together in a flash and then it just magically gets adopted, because if there's not public input, public discussion, it tends not to get passed, or it tends to fail. Now, I don't think that's the reason why this didn't get passed. I think it really just boils down to the uncertainty of certain building property owners who really didn't understand what that meant to them. Because if you're not in a historic district, you can't have tax credits. So if you've got an older building and you want to do a significant remodel, and you think of assistance, financially to make that happen, tax credits is not an option if you're not in a historic district or if you're not a historic building. And the commission had done a good job to really identify, or I use the term loosely, gerrymander the boundary line that was proposed, because they didn't want to have buildings that were non-contributing within that proposed district. In the end, the item got tabled. This council was not in a position to adopt, really felt that it wasn't appropriate at the time. And some of that probably was the economy. And we were talking in 2010 about doing this. And certainly the mindset was, this isn't good. But again, I think it really ties back to a lot of just not the best understanding of how important historic preservation is. So at this point, I'd like to roll it over to James to talk about the commission itself and a lot of their work.
I'm not worried about whether or not you'll be able to hear me. I'm used to working in courtrooms and classrooms without the aid of sound amplification, so my fear is I'm too loud. I became a member of the commission in 2011, and I will serve until 2014 on my first term. When I came on the commission, they had already launched a project with the downtown development effort, and so I was sort of in on the tail end of that. First, what I'd like to do is introduce you to the members of the commission, although because of numerous schedule conflicts, most of them aren't here. But our current president is Tim Maas, who lives in the Courthouse Hill District. Our vice president is Matt Hanold, who's an architect. Britton Graff is our secretary. And the other members are myself, Bob Kimball, Stacy Thompson, Anita Carroll, and our city liaisons, Gale, you've already met, and sitting next to him, Brian, you want to just stand up? Brian Zweigel is new with the city and is working his way in as an assistant with the Historic Commission and does a good job with us. My interest in historic preservation is to some degree fairly recent, but as the introduction indicated, when I was in college, I took a class that taught history from the standpoint of architecture and developments along those lines. And by preserving these buildings, it tells us a lot about who our forebears were, just as I was talking with my son before this afternoon. He had to sit and listen to my presentation and make sure I was getting it down. He suggested to me, well, what do you think people will say about you in 50 years? And it was a point I hadn't really thought about, but one of the things I think, as whether or not you're interested in history, if you are a citizen of Janesville, you can't help but appreciate the beauty of the buildings that exist in this city. It does tell us a lot about our forebears. For one thing, you know, the Victorian architecture was colorful, it was large, it was decorative. It's saying, here I am, world, and I'm ready to take you on. And if it's a Greek revival, one of the aspects of a Greek revival home was a reflection of the rise in democracy. In the 1820s, 1830s, democracy was expanding. Initially, you had to be a property owner in order to vote. Now, all you had to be was a citizen, and that development of that interest in democracy was reflected in homes that adopted Greek ideas, because that was the birthplace of democracy. As Gale pointed out, we serve three-year terms on the commission. We are all volunteers. You don't necessarily have to have an interest in history if you're just simply interested in architecture. I don't know, how many of you have had this experience? You have friends or relatives from out of state come in, and you want to take them around the community to show them where you live. Where do you go? I take them to the Courthouse Hill area and drive through. Sometimes, if the weather's nice, if they're not visiting in one of our Wisconsin winters, we'll get out and we'll take our own little walking tour. And I always take them to the Tallman House. It's a grand building. It's a building that I don't think we necessarily, the Rock County Historical Society, I think, is making strides to do this. But I don't think we make enough of that connection between Abraham Lincoln and this community. Abraham Lincoln is certainly the greatest president, at least in my opinion, who ever served in our government, and his connection is so important, and I'm not sure that we actually use that often enough. People who join the committee are people who are interested in preservation. They're willing to spend a couple of hours a month. We generally have meetings. The meetings are every other Monday, the second and the fourth Monday of the month, and roughly last an hour or a little more. You might spend more time. I'll talk about our job reviewing applications in a few minutes, and that might take some additional time, but it rarely takes more than half an hour, 40 minutes of walking the property, talking to the homeowner, and that sort of thing. So it's not terribly time consuming. If any of you have an interest down the road in serving on a commission, but one of the things I do appreciate is it does give us the ability to be hands-on and work with people. You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to be an architect. I'm not a builder. I was lucky enough that when I came on the committee, our president was a gentleman named Bruce Dennis, who is actually a contractor, and I had the experience of doing a number of reviews with Bruce, and as a result I learned a great deal about replacement windows and this, that, and the other thing that can be helpful to the people we work with. And certainly was helpful when Dennis was there, because he had a real knack for knowing what needed to be done. But you don't have to be a builder or a contractor. All you need is an interest in history and a willingness to serve your community. Among our responsibilities is oversight of the Tallman House. Although that fits under our jurisdiction, we don't do a lot of that. That's mostly done through the Rock County Historical Society, but we do have that as one of our listed responsibilities. It is the reason why I initially applied to the commission, because as I say, I really love that old house. And we conduct reviews of proposed projects by homeowners with the interest in maintaining historical preservation. We have our annual public service exercise, the Tallman House event. When the first year I was on the commission, we did the Restoration Expo, and now we're working on the signs. I apologize that we don't actually have something for you to see. It's still in the planning stages, but it's nearing completion. It's nearing the point where we can introduce it to the public, watch for it. But I think the people who've worked on the project have done a remarkable job of creating historical signage. As indicated, I'm a Civil War reenactor. My wife, who's sitting in the back, gets dragged all over the East Coast going to Civil War battlefields. And one of the things I think she has come to appreciate is the value that we can make with historical preservation. I understand that, you know, Wisconsin, we're not located on a battlefield, but we do have Abraham Lincoln. And that's something most communities don't. This is a photograph I took a number of years ago of the stairs and the porch at the Tallman House. And this is it's the same location. It's a little harder to see, but this is the restoration that was done. And I think you can see how very nicely it was done. I had the opportunity a couple of times to come up by the house while I was working with the Historical Society and talking to some of the people who were involved in the restoration. Quite brilliant craftsmen, and they've done a remarkable job. If you haven't been up to see it, you should go. The following slide is the Frederick Mansion in Ottawa. It's Ottawa, Illinois. They use it for weddings and other community activities. They conduct tours of the building. To a large degree, it is privately funded. This is the building. I was telling Gale Price when we were looking at this, there was a wedding while I was there a year or two ago, and every single one of those steps, on one side they had all the groomsmen, on the other side all the bridesmaids. I didn't count them, but there are probably about 16, 17 steps going up to the house, so that's a lot of people to be in the wedding. It was beautiful. They were all in their their tuxedos, and the women were all dressed in the same colored dresses. This building for a while was used by Ottawa for a number of purposes. It was for a while a satellite of the library. The library then built an expansion, and they turned it into commercial office space. They have since reclaimed the house and are in the process of restoring the interior. The lower level is done, and it's quite beautiful. They've done a really nice job. Again, this house is very similar to our Tallman house. It also has a Lincoln connection in this respect. It's across from the park where Lincoln engaged in the first Lincoln-Douglas debate in Ottawa, Illinois. So it overlooked that event. Gale was talking about repurposing buildings. The next slide is the Union Station in Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln's funeral train stopped there. That's where they brought his body to unload it. It currently is the city's post office, and there are some smaller shops. I couldn't recall the shops that were in there, but one of them is a small candy company. They make homemade candies, and the greatest chocolate as a diabetic, I shouldn't be eating it, but they make the greatest chocolate I've ever tasted. And in the front, they created a park and a plaza, but this is what it looks like. The building has been restored, and again, the exterior is exactly as it would have been in 1865, but inside it's actually a functioning number of businesses, the post office and some small stores. This is the plaza out in front. One of the reasons why I'm going through these is I want you to maybe share the vision, at least the vision that I have when it comes to historic preservation, because it's just not preserving these buildings, but making them available to people. That's why the historic tours that are conducted here in town, I think they're so valuable, because it gives our citizens and others a real sense of what we have here. I must have got carried away there. The old state capitol building, located in Springfield, Illinois. The restoration has returned to the building as it existed in the 1840s when Lincoln was a state legislator there. And that facility is run by the State Historical Society. It is a beautiful building. The interior is quite beautiful. In 2009, my wife and I had the opportunity to go down to celebrate Lincoln's bicentennial, and they toured the old courthouse, or the old state house, by candlelight. And it was beautiful, wasn't that, dear? Yeah, she's shaking her head, yes. It was impressive. And finally, Lincoln's home. Probably many of you have had the opportunity to go there. The one thing that I did want to sort of highlight, this is his actual home. Or no, I'm sorry, that's not his home. This is across the street. What they've done, if you haven't been there in recent years, is they've restored the entire neighborhood. So when you walk out of Lincoln's home, you see exactly what he would have seen when he left his home to go to his law office. This is his home, which is across from the house you just saw. And that's a slide of the neighborhood looking across the street, but down the street from his home. And Frederick, Maryland. Frederick is a city, again, my wife loves that community because of the historical preservation of the community. My primary interest was when we were working on the downtown development overlay. A question had come up about due process and appeal rights for businesses who wanted to challenge determinations made by the Historic Commission. And I was aware that they have not only a downtown historic district in Frederick that they had just created, but I had the opportunity to meet the lady who ran it. And so I had spent some time talking with her about what they had done to both bring businesses on board and to get their, to deal with this whole idea of how do you handle disputes after a commission makes its determination. And it is a community roughly the same size as Janesville. This is a photograph of their main street. All these buildings are subject to historical preservation. I took this from a parking ramp, which is at the corner, but the parking ramp is new construction, but even it was constructed to fit in with the mid-19th century aspect of the community. But as you can see, the buildings are beautiful. There's actually a guy on the ladder who's up working. Hopefully you can see him right over here. He's up, when we were there taking the photographs, he was up working on his windows. So. And this again is Frederick, Maryland, looking down the street from the buildings that we just saw. I don't know if any of you have been there. I think what my wife really likes is once you get down past the commercial buildings, to me it's a lot like Ireland. There are all these townhouses, And all the doorways are decorated much as the Irish do, with bright colors and the rest of it. Again, it is a beautiful city. What most people are, the one thing that most people are familiar with that our commission does is what we call certificates of appropriateness. When someone is planning work on their home, one of the things they do is they contact the city to get their necessary permits, and if it's determined that their house is in one of the historic districts, it is then assigned to the commission for a review. The application was to replace the siding, and in this particular case, this was the condition of the building. It's not in color, so it's not as obvious, but among the things that's not very clear, up in the top they have the little fish scales up by the roof, and we wanted to make sure those were preserved. And one of the things that they wanted to do was go to aluminum siding and vinyl windows to do the project. And the gentleman who owns the house rents it out. It's not his principal place of residence. And so I chose this one because it's an example of where we worked with the homeowner to come up with some less expensive alternatives than simply scraping the house and repainting it and trying to reconstruct the windows. We were able to do that. The siding was, ultimately the siding used was a composite material, but the company that makes the composite, one of the things that they're concerned about preserving is the width of the siding, the lapboard siding, and you can't find aluminum siding to do that sort of thing, but there are composite materials that will allow for that to be done and maintain the historical perspective of the house. The reviewers go to the site of the house where the property is located that is being reviewed. We meet either with the homeowner or with the contractor. Most often it's with the homeowner. And at this point I would like to make one sort of note. My experience is that the people that we work with who own these homes really are serious about preserving their historical aspects and their significance. It's not like these folks are buying these houses and with every intent of not maintaining them in a historical fashion, and they are really willing to work with people to get the job done. We'll discuss the project and the implications for the historical nature of the building. We'll talk about materials. Sometimes we even suggest a contractor. There are, at least that I'm aware of, 3 or 4 around who do this kind of work on these kind of homes and can be helpful to these individuals. And also alternative approaches for the type of work that needs to be done. In some cases, we will suggest tax incentives when it's appropriate to the homeowners. It's particularly helpful. I remember one circumstance where the people wanted to go to aluminum siding, and their argument was, well, look, I have to paint this place every 4 or 5 years, and it costs a lot of money. But one of the things that we were able to work out with them was the fact that these tax incentives work, and it can help defray part of the cost of actually maintaining the historical aspects of the house. There may also be grants. Union Station that we saw in the slide has been designated a National Historical Site, so has the Reddick Mansion, and so they're eligible for government grants as National Historical Sites, which provides money for upkeep and maintenance. It doesn't apply generally to houses, although some houses, Gale can correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the Tallman House on the National Historic Registry? Yeah, so And in my experience, we've never rejected a homeowner's proposal. One of the things I was going to do was sort of set out the appeal process, but I've never experienced it. We've never had a homeowner in my time on the board who was dissatisfied and wanted to appeal the ultimate decision. Now, I suspect there may have been some along the line. But we really sort of try to take a cooperative approach with these folks, and I think they come willing to work to maintain the historical perspectives and meet what our standards, as well as we're willing to work with them to help them get to that point without spending tons of money. And so I've never experienced an appeal, so I don't know how they work. At the commission meeting, after doing the review, we always send 2 people out to do the review, so there's a check on our work. Then at the historical meeting, the 2 people who conduct the review present their findings, and the property owner or representative is usually at the meeting to respond to questions or recommendations. Oftentimes, the 2 reviewers, a question will come up about something, whether or not we gave it due consideration. That's why we like to have the homeowner or the contractor there so they can respond to those questions as well as the reviewers. Possible outcomes: in order to obtain the necessary permits, the work there must receive the certificate approving the project's appropriateness. We can issue a certificate with conditions. In other words, they have to meet certain conditions before they can complete the project. We can do a conditional certificate, or it's never happened, but we could issue no certificate, not approve the work that's being processed. And the last 2 slides here, this is a slide of a house we did a recent review on. They wanted to replace the windows both downstairs and upstairs. These were the windows upstairs. Project was approved based on what they wanted to do. As so often the case, everybody was happy with the final result. On behalf of Gale, I'd like to thank you all for coming. You've been attentive. We appreciate that. And if you have any questions, direct them to Gale, because he has all the answers. Any questions?